Hello. Welcome to Stories for Wonderful Children, the podcast where I share the improvised bedtime stories I've told my children over the years. I'm Dan Wendelin, your host and storyteller. Today's story was told in July of 2008, and it's the first of a series of stories that I've been looking forward to sharing with you ever since I started this podcast. The story of the royal twins, Ea and Dak, and their adventures. These stories are some of my children's favorites of all the ones I've ever told. I hope you enjoy them as much as they do.
Once upon a time there were a royal princess and a royal prince born. They were twins. The girl was born first, and her name was Princess Ea. Her brother was born second. 5 minutes later, and his name was Prince Dak.
Dak?
And because Ea had been born first, the rules of the kingdom were that she would be queen of the kingdom when she grew up. And Dak, because he was born second, would not be the king of the kingdom. Instead, he would always remain a prince. As they grew up...
Why?
Well, because Ea was queen. And if she wanted to, whoever she married would become king. But Dak would always be a prince because he was the second child. That's just the way it works when you're royalty. Only the oldest gets to grow up to be king or queen. But Dak didn't really mind this. To him, it seemed like being king would be a lot of work. And he liked to do fun things. And he figured that being a prince was plenty of fun. He didn't feel like he needed to be king. As they grew up, Ea and Dak were the best of friends. They loved to play together. They liked to go out horseback riding. They liked to pretend to fight each other with wooden swords. They liked to play hide and seek and tag. They liked to play all sorts of games. And the games that they played frequently kept them playing until it was almost dark. And the king and queen had to send the Lord Chamberlain, whose name was Abner, to find them. And they thought that that was perhaps the most fun game of all. When they knew that Abner was being sent to find them, they would hide in their very best hiding places. And Abner would have to get the palace guards to help him look. When Ea and Dak had grown until they were both 17 years old, their mother and father, the king and queen, called them to the royal throne room and said, "Ea, we have grown tired of being king and queen of the kingdom. When you turn 18, we are going to retire and let you become queen, and we are going to take a long vacation sailing on a royal ship around the world." And Ea said, "Oh," because she really hadn't planned on being queen quite that soon. She thought her mother and father were going to be queen and king until they grew very old and couldn't be king and queen anymore. But she said, okay. She had had lots of lessons about all the things a queen should know about taxes and how to rule and how to judge and how to protect her people, protect her kingdom. And so, although she did not feel ready, she had all of the knowledge that she needed in order to be a good queen. And the king and queen said, "Dak, you must help your sister, be her loyal helper and an upstanding prince of the kingdom." And Dak said, "Of course I will." As they walked out, the king and queen told Ea to go and be fitted for her own royal robes and royal crown. After she had left and Dak was walking back to his rooms, the chamberlain, Lord Abner, said, "May I walk with you, Prince Dak?" And Dak said, "Certainly." And Chamberlain Abner said, "So what do you think of your sister becoming queen? She's awfully young, don't you think?" And Dak said, "Oh, I'm sure she'll do a fine job." And Abner said, "Well, I guess so." He said, personally, I think it would be really, I would feel much more comfortable if someone with more of a kingly air about him. Have you ever thought of being king, Prince Dak? And Dak said, that's silly, Abner. My sister was born first, and she will be queen, and I will be her loyal helper. And Abner said, but what if something happens to your sister? And Dak looked at him for a moment, and he said, I hope that nothing happens to my sister, Lord Abner. If something did, I would, of course, take her place on the throne, but I will be perfectly happy to simply be the prince and her assistant. Ah, said Lord Abner. Very well. Well, on the day of her birthday, Princess Ea woke up, and she got dressed in her very best birthday dress, and she walked down the stairs of the palace. And she decided that she wanted to go for a quiet ride to start her day. So she saddled her best horse, whose name was Quicksilver, and she saddled him, and she rode out the palace gates. Now, she had not ridden very far before she realized that there were other people on the road on horses behind her. And she thought that that was strange, because she had not seen anyone else saddling horses in the castle. She thought that she was the only one who would be out riding this early. So she turned off the main path onto a small bridle path, which was just big enough for one horse. She rode a little bit further, and then she stopped and she listened, and she could hear that the other people on the horses had turned also. They were following her. She tried to move her horse forward as quickly as she could, but soon they galloped up, and one of them took hold of her horse's bridle, and he said, we would appreciate you coming quietly, Princess Ea. We would hate for anything to happen to you. And Princess Ea, who was a little bit scared at that point, said, what are you doing? Take your hands off my horse. And the man took the reins of her horse and said, no, I'm afraid you have to come with us. And they led her off, and Princess Ea began to have worries. They were taking her down to the town where the dock was and the ships were. And they took her down, and they took her off her horse, and they got her onto one of the ships. And there in the ship was the Chamberlain Abner. And he said, I do not believe that you will be a good queen, Princess Ea. And so on behalf of your brother, King Dak, I have arranged for you to be removed from his way. He said, now your brother does not wish anything to happen to you. So this ship will take you to a faraway land where you will remain for the rest of your life. And Ea said, no, my job is to be queen. My brother would never do this. But Abner just shut her in the cabin and locked it. And Ea sat on the bed and she cried. She cried to think that her brother, who she had played with her whole life, had betrayed her this way. And then after she was done crying, she began to get angry. He had no right to do this. She was the one who was supposed to be queen. And so she looked at that small window. The ship was just sailing. It was trying to set sail out of the harbor. She tried to squeeze the window, but she couldn't in her big poofy dress. And so she took off her big poofy dress, and she had on just her little underdress, her slip, and she able to squeeze through the window and splash, fell into the water. And quickly she dove down as far as she could underwater, and she swam away from the boat until the breath was aching in her lungs. And then she came up and she took a breath, and she dove right back under, and no one saw her. And then after she was a ways away from the ship, she got him up to the surface and began to swim strongly towards the shore. Well, as she began to swim towards the shore, and she was most of the way there, she saw someone else swimming in the water near her. And they both approached the same spot and the shore, and as she crawled out, she saw that it was Dak. And she said, Dak! She said, what happened to you? And he said, Lord Abner kidnapped me and told me that you had ordered me removed from the kingdom." She said, "He told me the same thing. He kidnapped both of us. He must be planning to rule the kingdom instead of us." "I don't think so," said Dak. "We've got to get back to the palace." She said, "Well, Quicksilver's this way." And they both ran to where Quicksilver was, and they both got on Quicksilver's back, and they rode like the wind back to the castle. And when they arrived in the castle, they saw that there were guards that they did not recognize around the castle. Guards that were not the normal palace guards, but were some of Lord Abner's men. But Ea and Dak had played hide and seek in that castle their whole lives, and they knew every twist and turn and passage and secret hiding place, and so they snuck into the castle, and they got their clothes, their royal clothes, and they got their swords, and then they snuck to the throne room, and they saw there that the king and queen were not in the throne room. The person sitting on the throne was Lord Abner, and he was making a speech about how the king and queen had already departed, and about how the prince and princess were nowhere to be found. And so, although he did not want to, he was forced to rule the kingdom until the prince and princess could be found and return to their rightful places on the throne. And all the lords and ladies of the kingdom were there listening to him. And at that moment, from the curtain behind the throne, Ea and Dak stepped forward, just as Lord Abner was finishing his speech, and Ea said, "We thank you for your concern, Lord Abner. I am pleased to announce that we have found ourselves. Thank you." And Abner turned quick as you could, and he was pulling a knife from his belt. But as he turned to find both Ea and Dak with their swords drawn, pointed right at his chest. And Ea turned and said, "Guards!" And guards that she recognized came from the edge of the room, and she said, "Please take Lord Abner, former Lord Abner, down to the dungeon, and find all of the men that you do not recognize wearing royal guard uniforms. Put them in the dungeon as well." And then she turned and she said, "My royal subjects, I am proud to be your queen." She told them the story of Abner's treachery. And the lords and the ladies all cheered for the queen and for the prince for having avoided Lord Abner's ruthless grab to take over the kingdom. And together, Prince Dak and Princess Ea ruled well and had many adventures protecting their kingdom. But that is a story for another night.
Thanks for listening to Stories for Wonderful Children. I created today's story, but questions and witty commentary were supplied by my children. The music was created by Brandon Thompson. Your reviews and personal recommendations are the main way that new listeners find the show, so thank you for spreading the word. I'd love to hear your feedback, so feel free to get in touch via email or social media, which are listed in the show notes. Until next time, I'm Dan Wendelin, reminding you to tell someone you love a story.